And today we're going to be talking a little bit about reading the cards and how to kind of merge what seems like two contradictory points of view, but are actually quite complementary and harmonious. This idea of reading cards intuitively or tapping into the spontaneous insights that come as you pull, a card. And then how do you pay attention to the structures of the tarot, the traditions of the cards? I tend to field these kind of questions from students in, I would say, like the late beginner stage into intermediate, when you're looking to bridge away from, say, just like your typical definition books. And this question comes up of, well, how do I read tarot more fluidly? Or how do I merge what comes up naturally with what I know about the cards themselves? And I think sometimes, especially from a beginner's perspective, we tend to view that as, I don't know, as these sort of competing points of view that don't really fit together. When I think the reality is, like, the truth of what tarot mastery looks like, what a with ease with the cards tends to look like, is that you dip into the traditions, you look at the definitions, or you've memorized them, and then you're also paying attention to what intuitively arises within you when you're working with the cards, or noticing the spontaneous insights that come up. And it's the blending of the two together that actually makes for a masterful tarot reader. And if you work with the cards often enough, I think what you start to notice is that the cards themselves really shift and change depending on the reading, because they're so symbolic, right? The card of justice carries so many more themes than just, say, right and wrong, or law, or the cosmic order of life, or the consequences of actions, or what it costs to bring balance to the scales, or how to wield the sword of discernment, right? Just with that description alone, you have several really deep, very rich themes that you could tap into. And when you're doing your reading, you might hone in on, say, the aspect of, the consequences of action, or what's required of you to wield that sword of discernment with a kind of objectivity, or with a bit of a disconnection from the emotional subjective space, so that you can see things with a more bird's eye perspective. And maybe that's the part that you feel drawn to in the reading, but why do you go there? What in the reading tells you to hone in on this aspect of the card? There's no clear directions, at least that I've come across. And I certainly don't teach my students that, of, when you're reading, the card is always going to mean this, or that it's going to draw this particular thing out of you. What you start to notice is, depending on maybe the spread that you've chosen, the question that you have, the cards that come up, there are going to be certain nuances with the meanings that highlight or constellate within the reading itself. And that's what you work with. And how do we get to that point? How do you know what aspect of the card to hone in on? Or how do which definition to settle on, which meaning feels, correct or appropriate to the situation? To me, it's this blending between these two realms. And I think that there are two cards in particular that highlight this idea, like, so perfectly. And that's the High Priestess and the Hierophant. So these two cards, I feel, when students ask me, how do I read tarot more fluidly? Or how do I bridge, intuition and structure? Or how do I have more ease when I'm reading the cards? These two principles, the High Priestess as insight, as intuitive knowledge, as allowing what is emerging from the depths of the psyche or from the unconscious to be heard, is one of those foundational pillars, right? This is one aspect that we would want you to pay attention to when you're reading. The other comes from the Hierophant. So the Hierophant is guidance. He's the structure. He is the sacred mysteries of the High Priestess translated into rules and patterns and books and lessons and teachers, right? So he's formal guidance, he's systems of education. He represents like your tarot books. Okay. So, as an example, let's just pull out Rachel Pollack's 78 Degrees of Wisdom. The fact that someone has taken the tarot deck, these 78 cards, and written out both, an educational and archetypal exploration of the cards and giving you insight into their meaning, giving you structure, giving you form to work with. This all nests under the Hierophant, right? So your tarot books, that which you use for interpretation, that's the realm of the Hierophant. I also printed out, so I have an ebook over on my website called Tarot Definitions, and I go through all 78 cards, and they're not like big paragraphs explaining them. What they are keywords or phrases. So I usually just refer to it digitally, but I'm just going to show it to you guys here. So here's a page from the Major Arcana. Here are some keywords from the cups. This kind of resource, something that you can turn to that gives you that foundation to work upon that's based in the tradition of tarot, is the realm of the Hierophant. And especially when you're learning, when you're developing your skills and your awareness of the cards, the Hierophant's resources, the structure that you get from educational resources is so, so invaluable because the tarot is a set system. The earliest deck I believe that we know of is from like the early to mid 1400s in Italy. And the cards sort of developed over the next several hundred years, mostly in Europe, eventually moving, worldwide. But, we know that we're working with a tarot deck because it has a set of 78 cards. It's 22 major arcana, it's 56 minor arcana. There are 4 suits, the cups, the swords, the wands, and the pentacles. Um, when you draw a card like the Queen of Cups, she has a certain meaning to it. She represents the capacity for relational depth, for the reflecting of emotional dynamics. She represents mastery in that emotional relational realm. She knows what it means to dive into the depths of her own being, into that of others, and to navigate those waters of relationship. She represents mastery. She represents attainment and embodiment in the cups, in the suit of cups. And so when you draw the Queen of Cups, right, she has these very direct meanings. I'll just reference right here my tarot definitions sheet. So I call the Queen of Cups the Oracle. Each card in my definition sheets has this kind of archetypal title, if you will. And what are her qualities? Compassionate and attuned. Offers heartfelt counsel, quiet understanding. She has grace and emotional intelligence, mastery in connecting with others through empathy and care. She goes with the flow, yet feels deeply. She's receptive to the undercurrents that are pulling, attuned to the subtle tides within and around others. All of those definitions give you a ground to work within that are based on the tradition of what I'm saying is the Hierophant, right? So when you're trying to learn how to read tarot, I think it is, there's no right or wrong way, but still, I think it's really helpful, especially for beginners, to start with the realm of the Hierophant, which is to say, you get your favorite tarot definition book, or you use the little white booklet or the instructional booklet that's come with the deck that you've chosen, or you have something like a companion guide that I have here that gives you these set definitions to work off of. And what that does is it fills out this entire educational background of what these cards are and what they mean, rather than, utilizing the cards intuitively. We're strictly, in this case, doing a deep learning, right? We are the students at the feet of the Hierophant. And all of these resources, the individuals who have written these resources, we can consider them to be these kind of Hierophant like figures. They're teachers, They're guides. They're those who have dipped into the sacred mysteries of the tarot and translated them into a more accessible language, given form or shape to their different meanings, the cards' meanings. Um, and that orients you, right, in the system of tarot. But that's not all that tarot is. It's not the only place that we want to stop. In addition to that, the tarot, because it's a symbolic system, because its roots are from the way it developed out of the collective is through what we call from the Jungian perspective, the collective unconscious. So the depths of the psyche through this shared layer of archetypal reality, the tarot cards emerged hundreds and hundreds of years ago. And their themes, each card, and especially the Rider-Waite-Smith or any deck that is sort of following in this tradition, where each card is so symbolically rich, giving us all of this imagistic material to work off of. What it does is it activates the psyche. And when your psyche is activated in that really deep, intrinsic, instinctual way, what happens is that things begin to emerge. These insights begin to emerge, intuitive gut feelings, or a sense of like your mind being drawn to a particular aspect of the card or the way that you want to interpret it. So, although we might say the death card represents change and transformation and the turning of cycles and, the movement of seasons and the way that nature flows in these patterns, the death card, if you pull it, might bring forth a certain area of thought. Like maybe you feel drawn to start interpreting it more in its transformational capacity, or maybe you start to think that you're drawn into the ways death comes for everybody, and there's no running away from death, right? It's an inevitability that is kind of hanging over each and every one of us. And what was to make you, hone in on that aspect of, death, that harbinger of change or the transformational cycles? It's this intuitive kind of uh, impulse. Or it might be that the death card comes up and perhaps you had started your reading thinking about, I don't know, like, considering a job change or something like that. And what you start to notice as you sit with that death card or you're reading the other cards in the spread is that you're starting to feel drawn to consider something like relational dynamic. What was it that pulled you away from that original question to something else? It's the kind of activations of these unconscious connections that are merging into our awareness that we should pay attention to. And that kind of takes you out of, we might say, the realm of the Hierophant and into the realm of the High Priestess. So she's guidance in a more intuitive sense, where the Hierophant is guidance in that structured, traditional, sometimes even dogmatic sense. Her guidance comes from the depths of the unconscious in ways that we might struggle to kind of understand or track its emergence. It might feel as if a sudden insight, a thought, an inspiration, an image, a memory comes to us. It's like the veil between psychic realities begins to open. And when we engage in archetypal systems like tarot, her realm, the High Priestess's realm, becomes activated for us. And so she encouraged us into this kind of like stillness with the cards or a quieting of the mind so that insight that does not come from outer sources, but instead comes inwardly can emerge and we can listen to it. Because if you stay in the Hierophant's realm and you're only ever, say, pulling up your definition sheets and looking, or pulling out your book and reading it, you're missing the chance, or you're dampening the signal that's coming from the intuitive capacity of the psyche. And as I said, the beauty of tarot, and I think the mastery of a really proficient reader, is the blending of these two worlds together. The High Priestess, you can kind of practice her way of reading the cards by just pulling a card at random and just sitting with the images and really asking yourself, like, what is emerging for me? What is this bringing up for me? What am I reminded of? Where have I seen this reflected, in my life? And so without looking at definitions, in this case, the Three of Pentacles, you're just sitting with the imagery. You're sitting with the symbolism. Maybe your eye feels very drawn to a certain detail. Maybe you start thinking of a sense of coming together of different people or different aspects coming together. Maybe there's this feeling of what am I building in my life and why, right? So, you give yourself this chance to explore the emergent insight that's coming through based on the imagery and symbolism of the cards. And I think what can feel maybe a little bit difficult about this sometimes for especially beginner students, it's like, where do you begin? Do you begin with the Hierophant or do you begin with the High Priestess? Which is to say, do you begin with the definitions, the set definitions? Do you begin with the emergent insight? Um, the answer usually is maybe one or maybe the other. You can switch between the two. There's no hard and fast rules in that way when we're working with tarot. Like it can look different each and every time. And I would love to demonstrate this. Looks like there's quite a few of us on the live today. And so if you have a question, a tarot based inquiry, I will draw a card for you. So I do invite you to drop a question, and I'm going to pick some at random and kind of show you this bridging of how to read tarot fluidly, merging the themes of the High Priestess and the Hierophant so that you can actually see what it looks like in real time. So my recommendations, if you're going to drop an inquiry, is to keep your question open ended, focused on yourself. Consider the ways in which the cards can support you in a situation. So, not questions that are predictive or fortune telling or trying to read for other people, but instead are um, kind of geared towards supporting like your autonomy in life, your inner work, the deepening your awareness of some sort of situation. So rather than saying, am I going to get, the job that I applied for? You can ask a question like, what can I do to be more open to a job that's a better fit for me? Right. And then that card speaks to that support and the path you can take towards hopefully getting a job. So if you have a question, drop yours in the chat. As I said, I'll be pulling some at random and I'll kind of show you what I'm talking about here, this merging of intuition and structure when reading the cards. Janice says, is there an initial video I can go back to so I can gain beginner knowledge of tarot? If you're talking about here in the Artemisian, in the workshop archive, and this is in the membership, so it's our paid tier here at the Artemisian, there is a beginner tarot workshop that was just posted a few days ago. We actually just had the workshop this past weekend. So if you're a member or you're interested in becoming a member, you can definitely sign up and watch the beginners workshop. But you can also head to the directory of posts on my homepage, go to the tarot section, and there's a lot of material that I have that's free to read, articles or even audio posts that talk about tarot. But if you're wanting the most comprehensive beginner's introduction, you're going to want to check out my workshop. Okay. Okay. So Fiona says, would like to know if I should start looking for a new job. So once again, my thoughts here with drawing a card is that the theme that comes out will speak to perhaps the conditions that need to be considered for finding a new job. It might even speak to some of the limitations or the feelings of frustration that are coming out. Um, the thing that I would want to guard against is not that the cards are saying with a definitive clarity, yes, you need to find a new job, because what that does is it sort of strips your autonomy and gives it to the cards themselves. So in regards to looking for a new job and finding something that might be a better fit, what do you need to consider right now, right? So I'm just kind of taking that question and just shaping it a little bit just to ensure, as I said, that whatever card we pull doesn't tell you how to live your life, right? I think that's first and foremost, such an important aspect of working with the cards is that they should support us in the the actions that we take, in the feeling of ownership in our life. That the cards are expanding our perspective and our awareness around what's needed to, say, develop further, chase our goals and dreams and opportunities and things like that. Okay. So, Fiona, what are the things to consider about finding a new job, or, what themes surround all of that? Remember, today we are looking at how to read tarot more fluidly, taking into consideration when you pull a card, how do you work with its structure, its definitions, its set meanings, and also intuitive insights. So I've shuffled here at random and I pulled the Ace of Pentacles. So we have this ground of considering a new job and the themes that are around it. And if I was reading either for, a client or for myself, I'm just going to kind of show you the process that I go through that blends the world of Hierophant and High Priestess together. Um, I think just I'm sitting with the card first. I think I'm just naturally leaning in this moment into the High Priestess. I'm not wanting to jump into the set meanings and definitions, even though I know them very well. I've been reading tarot for almost 15 years. But what's coming up as I'm just sitting with the card is just the richness of the pentacle being offered. And what I love about the aces is that there are no people on the image of the card, right? So I'm just drawn, my eye is really, really drawn to the pentacle and the offering, the opening. And as I'm sitting with that, with this idea of exploring the possibilities of a new job, um, the Ace of Pentacles brings up for me this sense of what I feel like, or what you might be looking for, that you feel like that sense of ground that the pentacles bring, abundance, a feeling of support. Certainly it could be like very literal in that it's like financially abundant, but also a sense of fulfillment that can come with the pentacles. Is there somehow feel like a disconnection in a current role between, what you feel like you want, what you feel like you deserve, what you feel like you need for stability in your life, um, and what you actually have? Because when the aces arise, and now I'm kind of moving more into the Hierophant's world, when the aces arise, they tend to mark new opportunities, new beginnings, the chance for us to follow this thread or this journey of the minor arcana and to kind of reap all of the boons that come with it, and also to face all the challenges that come with it. So the Ace of Pentacles, if we move into the Hierophant's realm of structured definitions, means emergence or new opportunity in the realm of the earth element of pentacles, which very often does relate to work, but not just work as, say, excitement or inspiration. That would be more of like a wands figure. What I wonder is if your question is driven by Pentacles concerns. So, as I mentioned, stability, structure, a sense of stable ground in one's life. It might be actually how much money you're making and the feeling that you have enough, and maybe even more than enough, to like begin to save and to buy the things you need to buy, like the really practical concerns that come with the pentacles. And the ace in this sense says that there is a chance to begin exploring new opportunity. And in the case of, considering a new job, to me, that this ace of pentacles would very much encourage you to begin looking at what those options are, especially something that feels emergent in terms of opportunity, because aces have yet to be grounded into life, but they're speaking to something that's coming up, something that's possible. Um, and if I was to just dip a little bit back into the High Priestess's realm, what I would also say is consider what it means to sit with these themes of stability, opportunity, abundance, ground, having enough, and notice kind of what emerges with that. Since this isn't my direct inquiry, I don't have the, personal insight into that. But, the feeling that I get if I just like follow my my high priestess inwardly in this moment is that like I feel like the lack between those dynamics, that there's something maybe about the current situation that feels like it's not providing enough. And that might not even be, um, financial. It might be just the sense that the job feels unstable, or the sense that, you no longer feel held within like the structures of a role that you're in currently, or maybe you don't have a job at this time, but the ace kind of feels like it's almost this offering to bring structure and stability and a sense of ground where there might be a lack of one, or what used to be stable feels like undermined. So that's my high priestess, intuitive insight to that. But either way, for you, I would just consider what it might mean to open to potential and possibility, especially if that has felt like a no go zone. It's not something you have time for, or feels something that's very uncertain. The aces need us to consider in the kind of like mental, emotional, inner realm that a new path can emerge. And we have to notice what might be holding us back from that. So, okay. That's an example there with the Ace of Pentacles. If you have a question, if you have an inquiry, drop it in the chat. I want to keep just demonstrating for you guys what it looks like, because ultimately, with these kind of lessons, I can talk about theory and all of these principles, but I think it's really helpful just to see it in action. So if you have a question, and you would like me to pull a card for you, please drop it in the chat. Remember to keep it focused on yourself, keep it explorative, somewhat open ended, focused on like your life situation, your inner work, how you could be supported. And then I'll draw a card. You're welcome. Thank you, Fiona, for your question. Okay, let's take a look. All right, no questions yet. So I'm going to read for myself because that will help, I think, you especially be able to see the realm of the high priestess for me. Oh, Jeff, you said someone asked a question. Shanti asked a question. Oh, you're right. Thank you. How can I handle the resistance, frustration, and confusion with my health journey? Okay. Sorry, guys. Just remind me, because it's hard to read all of the chat sometimes. Okay. So, shuffling through, question I get often is, what's the right way to shuffle? There is no right way. It's whatever you like. I am an overhand shuffler, and then I read the cards that fly out. Okay. So the Nine of Wands coming out. So the question, once again, the inquiry here: how can I handle the resistance, frustration, and confusion with my health journey? I'm going to move into the realm of the Hierophant first, right? So structured definitions, insight that come from books and learning. What are the set meanings of the tarot? And maybe just to demonstrate that, I really recommend, if you're a beginner, to have a readily accessible resource. So the way that I designed my ebook tarot definitions is that it's not paragraphs and paragraphs of information, and it's a little bit more than keywords, so that when you're kind of dipping into that realm of the Hierophant, of wanting structure, of wanting to look at what the set meanings are, you can like very quickly look at it. So very quickly, let us look at the Nine of Wands. I call the Nine of Wands the survivor. And here I'm just going to show the image while I read off the definitions. Exhaustion due to trials and effort, wounded and needing recovery, finding resilience, perseverance in the final stretch, gathering strength, establishing boundaries, noticing the walls you've created defensively. Okay, so we're in the realm of the Hierophant. When we pull out our definition sheets, or we look at our keywords, or we pull out the book and we read the guidance that has come from a teacher, right? And that's really useful because it's setting the kind of the the educational background that we need to understand what this card means in the context of this question. So I call this figure the survivor. There's a feeling of woundedness here. So interestingly, for this card to come up around this question of handling frustration and confusion and resistance in a health journey, immediately there seems to be a reflection through the synchronicity of pulling the cards of the long and arduous journey that you've been on through this. And through the Hierophant's realm, we understand that this card speaks to an acknowledgement of how difficult that's been, how wounding it's been, the perhaps the kind of defenses or structures or adjustments that you've needed to make because of those limitations. And the imagery of the card really speaks to that, with each of these wands almost acting like a barrier, the figure themselves sort of leaning on this wand here. And of course, they have the bandage, around their head. So if we're actually um, ha- been dealing with some sort of illness or health issues, to see that reflected in a card like the Nine of Wands, I think first and foremost affirms like the difficulty that you have felt, frustration, that it's felt maybe confusing, that maybe there's been such a focus on how it's drained you of energy and will or a sense of vitality. The and I'm just going to kind of break down a little bit of why I'm saying that. The wands, the element of fire, the realm of spirit, of psychic and life energy, right? So anytime we pull the wands, we know that there's a kind of conversation or exploration around these themes. And the wound that is in the Nine of Wands is not only a physical wound, it's a wound of the spirit, right? We might say it's like the wound of the life energy, because when the wands are at their peak and at their power, when they're moving, when they're in flow, when it's accessible, we feel excited for life. We feel healthy. We feel vital. We have this sense of limitless potential. But we know, based on all of the different cards that we see in the Wands suit, that life is not always progressing and energetic and fun and inspiring, right? Sometimes that energy of life gets blocked. Sometimes it becomes wounded. Sometimes something holds it back. And the Nine of Wands is very much depicting that. So all of those sort of insights or descriptions are very much coming from like the interpretations of the realm of the Hierophant, right? Structured learning, set definitions, the patterns within the tarot, the meaning of the suits. All of that is very important background to have as you're trying to interpret this card. But your question is, how can you handle that? How can you meet it? Um, I think part of what the Nine of Wands asks us to do, to push forward, is to understand that there is a need for both continued persistence and fortitude in the difficulty of the journey, but also understanding that in some ways that the limitations, the frustrations, the health concerns, what's left you to feel wounded, can at times sort of create these conditions where we almost like cower in on ourselves, or we begin to withdraw from that energy and intensity of the wands. And there is sort of like this invitation that I tend to see in the Nine of Wands, and that I especially feel right now, is to kind of walk this line between honoring and acknowledging how limiting this has been, maybe how frustrating it's been, how much it has slowed you down. And then understanding that because we're at the number nine, because we're so close to the end of this cycle, there is this potential for things to begin shifting. And I think what the Nine of Wands might be asking, and this to me is sort of like a high priestess intuitive question coming to mind, is how can you begin moving within the limitations or within the conditions of where you are currently? Because the wands want energy, they want fire, they want a sense of something being fed, into it. And what the Nine of Wands tells me is that you can't just wake up tomorrow and feel all the way back to normal. There's that's almost like it's wishful thinking. It's too hopeful. It doesn't mean recovery can't happen or that shifts and changes can't happen, but we're not fully out of that arc of what this, illness is, or what that health journey is. But what it does say is that there's potential and reserves of energy that can be rallied and sort of funneled toward kind of rebuilding those sparks of life and beginning to move forward. Because the Nine of Wands is, as I said, very close to the end of the cycle. From nine, we go to 10. With 10, we have the closure, which brings us into the ace. So it feels like if I dip back into the realm of the Hierophant with patterns of the tarot and its structures, is that you feel very close to the shifting of that tide, of the moving back into the expansiveness and the potentiality found within the aces, but you can't do so in the way that is Ace of Wands or Two of Wands or Eight of Wands even, right? You have to work within the current conditions of this nine right here. And so to me, that doesn't feel like lay in your sick bed or continue to, feel limited by the frustrations or maybe the resistances that are coming up. It's like, what are the conditions telling you how you need to act? Like, how is it informing the ways that you should act in the present moment? Because the wands still yearn for action or movement or development. But we have to honor that the Nine of Wands sort of speaks to a dampened energy of that. So I think, to kind of sum that up, it's recognizing that the journey so far has been difficult and limiting and frustrating, and it's perhaps leading to further resistances. It also tells us that we can't act in the way that we did when we felt 100% at our best, but that doesn't mean that there isn't room for movement and play or creative energy or life energy to be infused into these moments. So, those are the things to consider with the Nine of Wands. I hope that was helpful. Okay. Okay. I think this is the next question. Um, what shadow aspect of myself needs my attention to move forward? Oh, like one of my favorite kind of questions. I love to add in like a shadow placement whenever I do readings because we don't often consider that. But if you read it all from a Jungian angle, you know how important it is to have a card that speaks to that which kind of hides right behind our awareness. So if you can add in that kind of question of, like, what is the shadow aspect? What am I not aware of? What shadow needs to be recognized to move forward? It is so rich, very deep, sometimes very confronting, but important and powerful. Okay, so anyways, shuffling through what shadow aspect of myself needs my attention to move forward. Okay. So the Three of Swords coming out. Three of Swords. So remember, our whole lesson today is really about when we pull cards and we're trying to find meaning and insight and we're trying to read more fluidly, how do we blend the realms of instinct and intuition and what comes up spontaneously with set definitions and structures and traditions? It's the marrying of the two. So rather than just jumping straight into the definitions, I just want to sit with the card for a second because, when I think about shadow and when I think about what is unconscious within us, it's really, really easy to just jump to, oh, it's this interpretation, right? We still are using the conscious perspective to make sense of it, which of course is all that we can do, right? We only operate from the ego. But um, if we allow a little bit of space or stillness, and that's one of the ways I describe the high priestess, like she's not busy, or maybe she's busy in other ways, right? When she activates within us, it brings this inner quieting, and you can actually lean into that when you're reading your tarot by sitting for a few moments in that kind of stillness. You can close your eyes. You can notice what emerges. You give a little bit of space for those intuitive insights or gut feelings or the inner images to come forward. So I'm just doing that for a moment. The shadow that needs to be met to move forward, to me is that which was that which felt deeply and piercingly wounding and yet has not fully found a healing or a sense of resolution or a sense of closure and lingers in the shadows in ways that I think are very, very subtle. I don't know that it's subtle, but that's just kind of my thought coming up at this moment. Sometimes the shadow sort of is like this puppet master that is like pulling the strings, and we don't kind of realize that these unconscious patterns or these shadow dynamics are driving certain behavior. For some reason, that's what this feels like to me. I sense that for this individual, there are things that have felt wounding, overwhelming, that which kind of broke the psyche into parts or felt like it pierced into these deep, tender, vulnerable places. And a certain degree of that experience could not be fully processed and has kind of sunk into the shadows. This is really, really typical. In fact, all of us have some version of this in our lives because oftentimes when we face some sort of overwhelming dynamic, whether it's like a relational trauma, a letdown, an intense challenge, whether it happened when we were young, whether it happened at a time where we felt vulnerable, whether it happened at a time where we just didn't have the mental fortitude and resources, the fullness of that experience oftentimes cannot be integrated into its entire capacity. And so, whatever we can't fully handle kind of moves into the shadow within the psyche and lingers there until it's time, until it comes, knocking on our door and says it's time to deal with these dynamics. So, I do wonder with the Three of Swords coming up, not that the individual has mentioned, like, what are you moving on from? What are you moving forward with? But I think that there might be a sense that life feels either stuck or stalled out, or you feel like drawn back into certain dynamics, maybe even like relational dynamics, because this Three of Swords is so deeply within the shadow itself. And so let's talk a little bit. All of that was like very High Priestess, by the way. My interpretations there, just sort of working off the imagery, seeing what's coming up. I'm going to dip more into the Hierophant side. And just for funsies, let's look at the definition sheet again, just so we really demonstrate what that's like. I call the Three of Swords the wound, right? Heartache and painful truth, sorrow and suffering, facing harsh realities, clarity born from confrontation, emotional fracture that demands healing and integration, a painful breakthrough. So, when we dip into the Hierophant's realm, the learning, the set definitions of the Three of Swords, we lean into that sense of heartbreak, intensity, that which has struck us into the vulnerable core, a situation of life that's perhaps broke apart from where we thought it was, some sort of situation that's kind of really affecting us both in like the mental emotional realm, because when this comes forward being a swords card, it might be affecting thought patterns, the way that we are interpreting life and its meaning, how we're gaining insight from certain situations, so it really informs those dynamics. And with the Three of Swords, one thing I don't always hear, readers talk about is how expansive and how powerful it can be when the Three of Swords moment is faced in its fullness. Because the threes in the tarot, once again, this is very Hierophant. We're going into the structures of the cards. The threes in the tarot are all about what is born from the dynamics that happened in the two. So the polarization, the choices made, the balancing of those dynamics, then there's an expansion that happens in the three. Things build from that point. And what builds from the point in the Three of Swords is that, yes, something wounding happened. Yes, something painful happened. Yes, we're carrying something with us that feels like it's unhealed. But the meeting of that wound, or the meeting of the reality or the dynamics that caused it, brings forth wisdom, clarity, insight, a sense of knowing oneself or others or a situation more deeply. The swords are, I just think, like the perfect example of what it's like to face all of the overwhelming dynamics of life and to emerge out of it stronger and more capable and more wise, right? So they don't they don't put rose-colored glasses on anything. It's looking at life lucidly and knowing that it comes with this kind of frustrations or darkness, or that we cloak ourselves in illusions and distortions. And it's this moment of being able to strengthen consciousness and awareness. And through that, we grow, we expand, we become wiser. So what partly is in the shadow that I was talking about is perhaps like a unintegrated wound, something happened that felt overwhelming that needs to be tended to, but so is like the wisdom and lessons and the growth of character or sense of self that will emerge with it. That's like the golden aspect of this shadow, is like along with this wound is this sense of a, say, understanding, your relational capacity, or what your boundaries need to be, or what you're looking for in a partner, or the ways in which you set yourself up for failure in a work situation. I don't know, whatever it could be. You learn something more deeply. That insight, that lesson, that wisdom is also within the shadow of the Three of Swords. And I think that that helps kind of bolster our courage to meet something as scary seeming, as the Three of Swords, because what is growing from the wound, what is coming out of the Three of Swords, that is a big part of that card. So I hope that was helpful. Okay. Um, I'll maybe take one or two more. Also, if you have general questions about reading the cards or blending like this intuitive approach with the structures and the definitions, please put your questions in the chat. Or if you have other tarot related questions, I'd be happy to answer them. And let's just look if we have any more inquiries. Okay, Janice, you have a longer one, so give me a second. I just want to read through it. Okay, so you're considering moving to the East Coast where you grew up, but your children are on the opposite coast there. You don't want to live too far from them, and they haven't established their adult lives yet. Do I continue to stay in limbo with my own life and desires as I have been doing for decades? Or do I make a definitive move and deal with the hard consequences on my heart if I end up living far from my children? Will I have regrets? One thing I want to emphasize is when I'm pulling cards for this, I don't want them to give a definitive answer of like, you should move, or like this one is right or this one is wrong. The best way to use the cards is to consider the themes that are coming up. And then what is that bringing forth within you? Does it settle you? Does it give you conviction? Does it give you further pause? Does it say this is a certain area that needs more reflection, right? These are the things that we want to consider with the cards, because then it's supporting you in making those choices for yourself, or, like structuring the ways in which you approach life so that you feel like you're engaged in it more deeply, rather than the cards telling you you should definitely move, to the East Coast or not. Does that make sense? Okay, so the Six of Wands coming up. Um, you're ultimately asking this question of like, will I have regrets? You're feeling an impulse. You've been desiring something of the move, but there's this tension point of life doesn't feel exactly aligned with that. Looking at the Six of Wands, I'm just going to hold it up for a moment. Looking at the Six of Wands, and for me, I'm like, I'm dipping more into High Priestess at this moment. I hear courage, right? I feel have faith in the path that's calling you, because the Six of Wands shows two victory wreaths. So the one that the figure is holding on the wand itself, the one that he is wearing as well. He's up upon a horse, walking through this kind of victory parade. And the feeling that the card gives me, without even considering its set definitions or trying to apply it to your question, is that the path of movement, that like where life is drawing you, is something to be um seriously considered and aligned with. And there isn't the sense here with this card that, the movement is coming from some other energy or some other force other than the writer themselves. I almost am like interpreting this as a dream image, because horses in dreams, or cars, vehicles of movement, speak to volition, personal autonomy. We think about, are you in a driver's seat? Are you, riding a horse? Are you in a plane or a bus or something like that? And what it speaks to when an individual is the center of that symbol of a driving energy is that which is coming inward from inside of yourself. Your personal volition is a more important aspect of where the thread of life is drawing you. So, what would it mean to sort of courageously and boldly, which are all very Wands characteristics, entertain this idea of moving where you feel pulled to, right? And I don't want to say that means you absolutely should. It's more like I want there to be an invitation to consider it with the kind of enthusiasm that the wands ask of us, because there is the feeling with the wands that that which feels impossible can materialize and emerge into life, even though it's not reflected in outer reality. So, right now, it might feel like if I move, it puts me out of sync with my adult children, um, or I don't know if I'll regret it or not. The ones kind of tell us that realities could emerge that we don't even know yet, that we haven't met them yet. We have to give them the potential to become real. That's why it dips very much into the realm of dreams and visions and intuitive insights, or that which could emerge that feels so antithetical to current reality. And if you're talking about desires and this feeling of where you're being drawn, the wands want us to create an environment both internally and externally for it to have a chance to meet reality and see where it goes. And the Six of Wands, if we just move in a little bit more into kind of the Hierophant's realm of set tarot definitions, I think I call him the hero. Let's see, what do I call him? Because he's very much in like the victory parade, right? Yeah. So I call him the hero. Once again, I'm reading this is off my ebook, Tarot Definitions. So just giving you a sense of what a companion guide could look like here. Um, the kind of emboldened spirit that comes with the heroic Six of Wands is something that could move us from a place of uncertainty in limbo into a place of conviction. And it comes from allowing yourself to dip into the potentiality of that confidence or that sense of potential that could be. Because probably this dynamic is emerging for you because there's something there that wants to come forth. What it might look like in the end, maybe it'll look a little bit different than you envision now. But the Six of Wands would very much encourage you to kind of pour that sense of potential, to perhaps even be bold and kind of move through what planning could look like and see what emerges within that. And it's not bringing up cards of uncertainty or regret. Like I'm not getting a Five of Cups here or anything like that. So to me, it's the internal questions should probably be less around the regrets and the uncertainties and more like what it would be to give shape and form to your visions and see what emerges with that. Because there might be a certain configuration in life that emerges from this that could bring you to this sense of resolution that makes everyone, in the family dynamic feel good and excited and open to the experience. But we don't get the chance for that if we dampen that potential. So that's Six of Wands. Hopefully that was helpful. Okay. Um, we'll close out here with any questions you guys have, general tarot questions or questions on how I've been reading here with this blend of intuition and structure. Now is your time. We only have a few more minutes left before I close out. So let me just take a look at the chat, see if there's any other questions. Do I read reversals? Yes, I do. I have a whole workshop on this in the members archive because reversals are very complicated. Oftentimes, for beginners, I do recommend holding off on reversals because they add so much complexity. It can feel very overwhelming. But in general, I love reversals because I believe that they bring nuance to the reading. They alert you that something is not off, but that there's like a tension a distortion, something's not quite expressing itself as it should, it gives you like this color and detail to a reading that you might struggle to otherwise get if you didn't have reversals. It doesn't mean that you can't get a full, deep reading if you don't use reversals. You can sometimes get that kind of nuance by the spread that you use. Like say you have a position in a spread that speaks to a challenge point or a shadow or something that's underlying a situation that you weren't aware of. That could help you get into like the depths of, what these cards are speaking to that a reversal could bring. But for me, when I get a reversal, there is an immediate sense of I need to understand why this card is not expressing itself fully. What is blocking it? Or why is there a tension? Why might it be in shadow? Why might these dynamics be only in a sense of potential and not fully emergent or realized in life? Like all like sorts of questions like that. I don't read reversals as only the negative meaning or the opposite meaning of the upright. I view them in a few different ways. That's something I go over in the workshop, but it's something to consider that when you feel ready, try out reversals. But there are many incredible tarot readers who never use reversals, and their readings are deep and powerful and insightful. So you don't need them. One last thing I'll say is that sometimes depending on the deck that you use, reading with reversals is actually really weird and difficult, or it doesn't make sense because of the way that they've been designed. That they're only like meant to be read upright, or the backs of the cards, depending on how they're designed. Some of them have a certain design that doesn't fluidly move up and reverse. You could actually tell it's reversed. And so a deck like that, you probably wouldn't want to read with reversals either. So there are many constraints or considerations one should take about reversals, but I think they're great. I love getting them. They're challenging, but they really help refine your relationship with the cards. Okay. Doesn't look like there are any more questions. So, okay, that wraps up our mini lesson today. A recording for this is going to go out shortly. As I mentioned, the Tarot for Beginners workshop that we had in the membership this past weekend is up in the archive. So if you're wanting to go deeper into the basic fundamentals of tarot, I recommend checking out that class. It's in the members portal, so it's part of the paid tier here at the Artemisian. And next month, based on the votes of our members, we're going to continue our tarot studies. And so we're going to be doing a more intermediate workshop on refining our reading skills, looking at the different patterns in the tarot, like the numerology of the pips, things like that, and really kind of taking our skills into that next stage. So if you're on a tarot journey or you're wanting to begin, I invite you to join us in the membership. And yeah, that's all. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'll see you guys next time. Bye.